My name is Roosevelt Giles. I'm chairman of the board of Atlanta Life Insurance Company. Over the next 30 minutes, together we're going to watch a Black History Month special. But before we get to that, I want to take a second to talk about Atlanta Life. Alonzo Herndon started the company more than 100 years ago. He was a former slave who learned to be a barber. As an African American, he wasn't even allowed to use the front door to his barbershop and was not allowed to get his haircut in his own building. He saw how minorities couldn't get life insurance. They had to hold fish fries just to bury their loved ones, and decided to start his own company. Atlanta Life was born, and Mr. Herndon grew the company, expanded into other states, and kept hiring African Americans, giving them economic opportunities in these communities. That legacy of inclusion, hard work, and giving back was handed down to his son, Norris Herndon, who expanded the company into a multi-million-dollar empire. Throughout Atlanta Life's 113-year history, there has been a consistent link between the company's success and giving back. In 1950, Norris established the Alonzo F. and Norris B. Herndon Foundation, helping those who can't help themselves. The foundation has given more than $5 million to education, nonprofits, churches, and people that needed the help. The only request of the recipients: pay it forward and help others any way they can. Along with the charitable works, the Herndons were at the forefront of the civil rights movement. Alonzo was a key part of the Niagara movement, the group that eventually became the NAACP. And as the civil rights movement began in Atlanta, meetings were held in the company's basement. We bailed out innocent protesters. And in 1990, Atlanta Life Insurance Company bought the Pilgrim Health and Life Insurance Company, which included the policy issued to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., issued in 1957. In our long history as a company, we have learned there is nothing more important than helping our associates, our clients, our communities grow, succeed, and live the American dream. We are dedicated to doing what's right. It's what makes Atlanta Life Company special, this country so special, and it is the foundation of who we are. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Dr. Edward Irons, who celebrated his 95th birthday last year. Ed made a major contribution to Atlanta Life, and we are forever indebted for his services. Pioneers like Dr. Irons inside our company are leading the way and in turn helping pioneers across this great city, state, and country shape our future. Atlanta Life Insurance Company is proud to sponsor this Black History Month special.
The following is a special presentation from 11 Alive News, Today's Pioneers, sponsored by Atlanta Life.
You're not here by accident. You're here on purpose.
We need people who are selfless. I mean, they are willing to do whatever it takes to change the world.
Don't get it twisted, because a lot of people feel like, well, that was then and those were old people. No, they were not. They were you all.
Get in touch with your inner spirit and keep your feet on the ground.
Every generation is supposed to disrupt, is supposed to challenge.
Every generation has to be a part of the freedom struggle, because if not, we lose ground.
We have to realize that the civil rights movement is not over. It just looks a little bit different, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
In spite of what's going on in the world, I'm excited about your life.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Aisha Howard. This Black History Month, we celebrate today's pioneers, people on the front lines of change. We're talking about ordinary people doing extraordinary things to improve the quality of life for those in our community. Atlanta is a city with a rich sense of not just Black history, but American history, and it's weaved into our social, business, and political fabric. A journey made possible by the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement who had the courage to say enough. We began with a salute to them and some iconic moments in time.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Birmingham was the eye of the storm, so that if we could get Birmingham to turn around, the rest of the country would move easily.
We thought we would be killed, and we were prepared to be killed. Dr. King said, you know, they don't call it Birmingham for nothing.
We will use the dogs if they start drawing knives again. We will use the hose if it becomes necessary.
Being hit with a water hose was a very painful experience. It knocked me down, and I described it as feeling like being hit with a whip.
I never thought that it could happen any place in America.
The movement had reached its zenith in the South, and we now wanted to go to the seat of government.
President Kennedy didn't like the idea of hundreds and thousands of people coming to Washington. And he said, Mr. Randolph, if you bring all these people to Washington, won't there be violence and chaos and disorder? And we would never get a civil rights bill through the Congress. Mr. Randolph responded and said, Mr. President, this will be an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent protest.
I have a dream today.
It's certainly the most significant speech that has occurred in America in our 250-year history. It stands with the Gettysburg Address, and it may even be more significant because it ignited an international dream.
Thank God Almighty, we are free.
52 years since the death of Dr. King and nearly 4 years after America's first black president, we ask, who are the black leaders of today and what are the main issues facing black America?
Challenges of the past.
This is raw tyranny under the guise of maintaining law and order.
Teach us what we need for the future.
But it was for one reason, and that was because of the color of his skin. The church has become more secular, and I think the black church in particular, as we have prospered, we have taken our eyes off of activism.
Pastor Lee Jenkins grew up believing black churches held a leadership role during the civil rights movement. It was the church that created leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others of the movement.
We need that same type of sacrifice today.
Jenkins has made that sacrifice. He left a successful career as an investment advisor to answer a higher calling, becoming lead pastor at Eagles Nest Church in Alpharetta.
I just wanted to make more of an impact, again, on families and on people.
And race relations.
I don't feel like we're in a very good place. It just looks a little bit different, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
A few years ago, Jenkins jumped into that work with a new idea called the conversation movement.
That I would experience being called a spick to my face by a little old white lady I'd never seen before.
It's a joint effort between his church, predominantly black, and Roswell community, predominantly white.
So what we have tried to do in these small groups is to personalize all of our experiences. And then that leads to racial unity and understanding.
Every generation has to be a part of the freedom struggle, because if not, we lose ground.
Losing ground is not an option for Dr. Bernice King. As CEO of the King Center, she continues to pursue her father's quest for equality. She believes one of today's biggest issues is the racial wealth gap.
If there's some kind of disparity or some deficiency that a person has, wealth can put them in a position where they can overcome it.
King says conquering the divide and other racial challenges of our time doesn't require just one prominent leader like her dad.
I think it's less about the actual person and more about the collective as we move forward.
Democracy failed Georgia.
Since 2018, Stacey Abrams has become a political darling among Democrats. During her race for governor of Georgia, she came closer to winning than any other Democrat since 1966. Abrams never conceded to Brian Kemp. Instead, her voice got louder, pointing to voter suppression as one of the main reasons she lost.
During the 1960s, it was evidenced by Jim Crow laws that physically prevented you from voting. Billy clubs, hoses, dogs. But what it looks like today are administrative rules.
She created the voting rights advocacy group Fair Fight Action to fix the problem.
There's a danger inherent in anyone who denies democracy to an eligible citizen. Because when we break the machinery of democracy, we don't just break it for those we don't like, we break it for everyone.
Abrams has been named a leader for the Democratic Party, even mentioned as a possible VP running mate for whoever becomes the Democratic presidential nominee.
And as a black woman, as a woman of color, as a person of color, and as a woman, I think it is absolutely my responsibility to not shrink away from it.
Abrams has come to recognize the importance of her visibility.
There's a mural of my face on a building, and it's near where my nieces go to daycare. Knowing that my 4-year-old niece looks up every day and doesn't just see my face, but sees her potential and believes that it's possible, and that's what Black history is about.
For Abrams, her place in Black history is still being written. With certainty, she believes one day she will be president of the United States.
So we are part of a nation that has made it its mission to help lift everyone up, and we cannot be left behind.
Up next, the reality of being Black in America today.
You're watching Today's Pioneers, sponsored by Atlanta Life Insurance Company, where corporate partnerships with Atlanta businesses are key.
The fastest growing component of the marketplace are minorities and women. And the single fastest growing element of consumers in almost all product lines are African American buyers. So these companies understand that. This investment translates into their own growth.
Anybody who's successfully made a business that has survived more than a year or two is, by definition, if they're Black, they're resilient. They have seen adversity and they know how to problem solve.
I think when we partner with companies like Atlanta Life, we see an opportunity to not only help learn from the partners that we work with, but also set an example that supplier diversity isn't something that we do because we have to check the box. Supplier diversity is something that's important to all of us. We need a supplier base that reflects our global customers and our global workforce, and to learn, because we don't have all the answers, and we need to learn different ways to serve our customers. And the partnership with Atlanta Life is a great example of how we can display that partnership for corporations across the country.
I am particularly proud that these Atlanta-based companies have opened their doors to African American business. It is long overdue, and there is no better time as now.
Atlanta Life understands the meaning in a wonderful African proverb. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
African American youth unemployment has reached an all-time low. African American poverty has declined to the lowest rate ever recorded.
One thing we can all agree on is Black people today do have more opportunities and better access to a good education than ever before. However, according to a new report, many remain disadvantaged compared to whites. The study concludes achieving the American dream is possible, but it's not easy for many people of color.
That's pretty, that's pretty.
When Emmanuel Jones admires a brand new Ford truck, his mouth starts to water.
That's good.
Not because he's a pickup buff, it's because they're his bread and butter.
Our fortunes live and die with the F-150.
Jones owns the Legacy Ford dealership in McDonough, Georgia, one of the largest Black-owned businesses in Metro Atlanta.
When I took over 26 years ago, this building looked just like this.
Next door, Jones also operates a Hyundai dealership.
How long have you been here? 16.
About 100 people work for him, including his daughter, Imani.
And I could really use a new car.
Who he's made the face of the company.
Hey Dad, how about that new car?
Imani, I'm grilling.
Well, how about these great deals?
The last 2 days, we actually sold 2 Raptors.
His son, Emmanuel Jr., works for him too.
What is it like working with your dad?
The first few years was probably the most challenging.
Including making it to work on time.
But I didn't wake up until about 10 to get to work when I was supposed to be at work at 7, and he fired me on the spot. Oh. I was fired for about a couple weeks there.
Hey Dad, I just graduated top of my class.
His daughter is now a junior at Vanderbilt, and his youngest son is a naval officer in divinity school at Harvard University.
I just want to encourage my kids to be valued members of this great country.
While his kids benefited from their father's guidance, Jones did not grow up with the same support. He became an orphan at age 11 after his mother and father both died from illness. This is the home he grew up in a community off Bankhead Highway. It's an area of Atlanta known for its eyesores, economic disparity, and Black inequality, often echoed in the rap music industry.
Bankhead,
been pulling caper.
And that area over there looks the same today as it did 30 years ago. As a matter of fact, it looks worse.
Really?
Yes.
Is that frustrating?
Oh, it's extremely frustrating because there's so many good people that live over there and they need essential services.
Bankhead Highway's problems mirrors the findings in a new report by the Economic Policy Institute, which looked at the state of African Americans since 1968. The biggest improvement, educational attainment. In 1968, just over half of African Americans had a high school diploma. Today, it's more than 92%. But that's where the good news ends. College graduation rate still lags behind whites, which grew twice as fast than blacks.
So I see those opportunities there, but it can't end there. We got to figure out how to integrate people of color fully into the fabric of this great country, and that hasn't happened yet.
Also unchanged, black home ownership. Over the past 50 years, it has stayed at about 41%. Black unemployment got worse. In 1968, unemployment was at 6.7%. Last year, it climbed to 7.5%. And the typical black worker still only makes 82 cents on every dollar earned compared to the typical white worker.
There are a lot of factors that play into this.
Dr. Maurice Hobson is a history professor at Georgia State University and author of a new book called The Legend of the Black Mecca: Politics, Class, and the Making of Modern Atlanta.
A black person would need to live 230 years to catch up with the generational wealth of a white person. And we're not talking about wealthy people. We're talking about
middle class,
or what we consider to be normal. And
Hobson says that income disparity will eventually drive black out of historical African-American Atlanta neighborhoods like Auburn Avenue.
Black people cannot afford to live in this city. So this was black hallowed ground, and that is being erased. There is no respect for preservation in this city.
The most troubling disparity in the report includes incarceration rates of African Americans. From 1968 to 2016, the share of blacks behind bars tripled.
What goes through your mind when you hear that number?
Alarm.
Jones is working to change that, not as a dealership owner, but as a state senator in the Georgia legislature. Since taking office in 2004, he's authored and helped pass laws aimed at reducing the disparity of student discipline in schools, reducing high school dropout rates, and cutting the pipeline to prison cycle of young African Americans.
It starts with making sure that kids don't have disparate treatment just because of their color. White privilege is real, and it's always been real. If anyone has ever walked in the shoes of an African-American male for the 58 years that I have, they would understand that.
But the truth of the matter is, King made the ultimate sacrifice, and we're still fighting the same battles. I asked the question, was this in vain?
How do you react when someone says you've made it?
I don't ever think I've made it. My life started on Bankhead Highway and Baker Road, where my family started. My life will end on Bankhead Highway and Baker Road. And whatever that journey is in between for me is whatever I can give back, not just to the community, but to all those constituents I serve and to my 3 kids that I birthed, and hopefully I will leave something along the way for them.
Coming up, teaching life's lessons he had to learn the hard way.
You're watching Today's Pioneers, sponsored by Atlanta Life Insurance Company, where giving back is part of the culture.
I know that's what the future of Atlanta Life, and it is amazing, but even more important, the future of the Herndon Foundation, to give scholarships to more and more young people of color.
There's a value for those who want to be entrepreneurs, to realize you can do it. It might seem tough. You might feel like you don't have a chance. You might not feel you have enough education, or you don't come from a wealthy family. But all these businesses like Atlanta Life started with a man who was a slave.
So I believe we have to find some way to mentor and invest the next generation into the next generation so that they know there's a world of opportunity for them and for them to be able to see a future that they might not have a sense of today.
Atlanta Life and the Herndon Foundation are going to set records and create a model for our country of what paying it forward really should look like.
But the thing about Alonzo Herndon, I learned it from my grandfather, is that a company can do well and it can also do good.
Year after year, the United States continues to have one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. So if the prison population were a city, it would be among the 10th largest. Our next pioneer knows firsthand what life is like behind bars.
Nothing appears out of the ordinary here. It's a classroom filled with young men soaking up knowledge.
So what did y'all take away from that?
Time, don't wait on nobody.
Keith Strickland is leading the course, but Keith isn't a teacher.
Y'all know my background, convicted felon.
At least not a teacher in the traditional sense.
I sold drugs across the country. I made over $1 million selling drugs.
Keith, an Atlanta native, already sold drugs and was arrested by 13.
I did a lot of damage in this community. We caused a lot of violence.
At 16, he was a convicted felon.
I became a convicted felon before I knew what the definition of a felony was.
He didn't finish high school, and before the age of 25, he was arrested nearly 50 times and served 5 years behind bars.
A lot of times we look at children and we say, what made you do this bad action? Or how did you get involved in this thing? But we don't see the life circumstances that that child is living through.
For Keith, his childhood life circumstances involved growing up in an abusive home. And at 5 years old, his view of the world was painted in the colors of blood and drugs.
I never had a mentor. So I attached myself to the people in the streets because they were there. I used to go play at crack houses. So I'm learning this behavior while I'm just a kid trying to play with one of my friends.
In 2007, Keith faced 35 years in prison, but was released early. The judge saw something in him.
A lot of times it's not a moment when a person wants to change their life. It's a moment that's presented when opportunity comes where a person can change their life.
And after prison, Keith started selling something new. A dream. He started his own company, making the transition, creating programs across the country, helping in prisons, court systems, and governments, trying to help people unlearn the things that were hurting them. Keith realized one of the best ways to do that was to get to young people before they made mistakes. In his old neighborhood, he turned to Dr. Tim Jones with Best Academy.
His message is even more poignant. His message is even more riveting because he is them.
A lot of these children who are in this school right now, they grew up in the homes where their parents were using the drugs that we sold. So we made an impact on their lives, not even knowing it.
Keith looked at his own childhood, played back the horrors that blocked his path.
A lot of us have the same challenges that we face in our local communities, whether it's violence or drugs.
In this classroom, Keith is trying to turn the page to a different chapter in young black men's lives, and they're listening.
It's just a phase of where you're at in the process. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Instead of talking at them, Keith encourages them to use their voice.
Can you repeat that?
Wow. Would you rather be consistently good or occasionally great?
So they know they have a say in what happens.
My goal is to be a role model, especially for my nephew, because he don't have no male role models right now.
But Keith knows there's more work than one man can do alone.
Every year, about 25 kids in our program are murdered. Every year, and that's just in one city alone, and we got programs across the country.
He says wanting children to be better than the adults around them is a big ask.
It's a child out there who's dying because nobody was ever in their life. It's a child out there who is willing to break in somebody's car because they're hungry. It's not our children who are failing us, it's us who are failing our children.
So that's what you see here in this classroom. It's more than a former drug dealer telling young men to step up. It's a man showing those behind him how to take steps towards a better life.
It's not for children to pave a way for themselves. It's for adults to make a way for the children in the community.
A special tribute to a civil rights legend when we return.
You're watching Today's Pioneers, sponsored by Atlanta Life Insurance Company, impacting lives for more than 100 years.
What Atlanta Life means to me is resiliency, creativity. This is a business that was born out of segregation and discrimination and a lot of racial hate.
Atlanta Life means to me something of a national treasure. It's a place that was started over 100 years ago in the midst of difficult times in the nation's history and difficult times for African Americans.
Atlanta Life, even the name said it was of Atlanta. And though it spread out to many states, it never lost its soul, because its soul was chiseled into Atlanta.
What I found with Atlanta Life, an extraordinary business and group of people that are on a mission to cause anybody who's underserved, anybody who's at risk, anybody who's in need, to have the financial safety and security, the financial literacy to live their lives and be their best selves.
There's a lot of people who don't necessarily have the resources to be able to start their own business, even if they want to. They don't know exactly where to go. So with Atlanta Life, at least they're able to show these underprivileged African American youth exactly where to go, what to do, what information they need to learn in order to start these businesses, how to become successful when they do start their business, and just give them the tools they need to succeed.
We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors and people that came before us. So if Mr. Hernan can come from basically nothing and build that, then what does that mean to me? It means that I got to be on my stuff, and he sets that example, and sets that example for everybody in future generations to come.
You're looking at the images of what is known as Bloody Sunday. Demonstrators on a peaceful march for voting rights in Selma, Alabama were confronted by police who beat and forced people to retreat back across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. March 7th will mark the 55th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Two of the architects were Atlantans, Reverend Hosea Williams and Congressman John Lewis. John Lewis, who just celebrated his 80th birthday, is a profile of courage yesterday and today.
There is in each of us a dream.
Growing up in rural Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, I didn't like what I saw, and we had to change that.
For young John Robert Lewis, the dream inside him would empower him with vision to see beyond unspeakable horrors of present and past, to see the future, to challenge his times and change history. This tender-hearted and resourceful child, born on a farm in 1940, who everyone called Preacher.
Me working in the field, my mother would say, "Boy, you're falling behind, you need to catch up." And I said, "This is hard work." And she would say, "Boy, hard work never killed anybody." I said, "Well, it's about to kill me." So I learned to work hard, and I've been trying to keep up.
And at 15, the dream inside John Lewis ignited into a lifelong life force as he watched the news of the Montgomery bus boycott, feeding on the revolutionary ideas and ideals of Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr., changed his life.
Rosa Parks and Dr. King taught me how to get involved. They inspired me. They helped to make me the person that I am today.
Young John Lewis. This is the John Lewis who, with Dr. King and 4 others, organized the March on Washington, August 28, 1963. One of the dreamers on those steps in front of Lincoln. Brother John Lewis. The youngest speaker that day, 23 years old.
I saw the sea of humanity, and I just said to myself, this is it. I must give it all I have.
We do not want our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now. We shall splinter the segregated South into 1,000 pieces and put them together in the image of God and democracy. We must say, wake up, America, wake up.
Does the dream serve you, or do you serve the dream?
Your vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most powerful non-violent tool we have to create a more perfect union.
Don't be so quiet. You too can bring about a non-violent revolution.
Generations from now, when parents teach their children what is meant by courage, the story of John Lewis will come to mind. An American who knew that change could not wait for some other person or some other time.
Congressman Lewis revealed recently he is battling pancreatic cancer. Our thoughts and prayers are with him. John Lewis, one man who had the courage to say, enough. Thank you for joining us.